and we're very glad you're here. We're intrigued by this thing about beekeeping and prisoner of war as well, so we'll leave that to you to share. So thank you. If you will.
It's a pleasure to be with you this year. I'm coming down a month. Pleasure to be with you this evening. As you can see, I received a certificate this year from the British Beekeepers Association for 80 years beekeeping. And so that's really the subject to start with this evening. So I'll sit down because I gather they want me to use a microphone. I hope I'll cope all right. Right, I think that's got to come out a bit like that, hasn't it?
Okay.
Right. So 80 years devoted to bees, beekeeping and lecturing. Year 1941. In 1941 I received my call-up papers to go into the RAF, and so in 1941 May I was moved to Padgate, and from there I went to Skegness for what we call square bashing, the military training, and then on to Penarth in South Wales for trade training, and then I was sent to an airfield in Rutland, in Cottesmore airfield, and I was there from July till October, when I was told that I'd been posted overseas. That will give you some idea of my age. Save you working there, I'll tell you I was 95 last June. So that's why I'm really sitting down. So we start this in 1941 when I was called up in May. I think I'd better just tell you that I became a Christian when I was 11 years old, and so when I was told I was going overseas, on the Sunday as I was due to report to the camp where we were going to be sent overseas from, I was asked to speak to the church, and I told them not to be too concerned, to remember me in their prayers, but I was going overseas and I was sure God had a purpose for me, because all things work together for good to those who love God and to those who are called according to his purposes. So that was my background when I went and reported for kitting out with, it turned out to be khaki tropical clothing, so obviously I was going to a hot country. On the early December, we got onto a train and went up from Liverpool to Gurrock in Scotland. And there we went onto a boat, and one of the boats that I went on was the Esperance Bay, sister ship to Jarvis Bay, which was sunk during the war. On the 6th of December, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, and they attacked the shipping there and created havoc. Consequently, America declared war on the Japanese. And the day we sailed from Gurrock, on the 8th of December 1941, Winston Churchill was announcing on the radio that we were at war with Japan. So that was the basis under which we sailed from Britain. We spent Christmas Day, 1941, in Sierra Leone Harbour on the west coast of Africa. And then when we left Sierra Leone, we sailed south along the African coast. Some of the convoy of ships that we were travelling with went into Cape Town, But the Esperance Bay continued on with the others and went into Durban. And so we arrived in Durban, and there I was transferred from the Esperance Bay to another ship, a troop ship called the Danira. We sailed from the port in Durban, and we headed up the coast of Africa northwards towards India. Apparently we were going to Bombay. But on the way there, the whole convoy suddenly turned about and started sailing south. And so we went round Ceylon and towards the Dutch East Indies and to Singapore. So my original interest in bees actually started in 1936. But we arrived not in Bombay, but we arrived in Java, in Batavia, here on the north or south end of Java. We were unloaded on the dockside, spent the night on the dockside, and the next morning we went into a native barracks where we stayed for a week, and then we were put on a train and we went up into a place in here called Garut. And there we were about 3 weeks when the Dutch capitulated and we were all prisoners of war. A week later, the Japanese came on the scene. We didn't see them for about a week. I was on guard duty at the entrance when the Dutch capitulated and we had surrendered as prisoners. The Union flag was taken down and a white flag was put up. What an emotional event that was for me to know that we as Britishers were subject to the Japanese. But a week later when the Japanese came, we were put on a train on the 15th of February after the Dutch had capitulated. That's the signing of the capitulation in Singapore of the British. And on the 9th of March, the Dutch surrender came, and we were put on a train and we were taken back to Batavia. And in Batavia, we were moved into a native jail. We didn't have transport like that. We had to march from the station. But we went into this jail, surrounded by a wall, and we were put into cells. The plaque there on the side of the cell says for 10 persons, but there was 20 or 21 of us packed into each of these cells, and we were there for a week, just having our food passed underneath the bars. In the corner there was a block that was a toilet, but you can imagine with 21 people in there for a week, the place got quite unbearable. The problem was that there was 1,000 of us had been taken prisoner in this jail. There were 1,000 others in different parts of Java and Singapore, and the Japanese didn't really know what to do with us all. They had to work out what we should do. After a week, we managed to get out of the cell. Some of us slept under canvas on a plateau. And so, I'll come to that in a moment. So we got out of the cell, and our task was, we were numbered off in Japanese numbers. We had to learn that. If we made a mistake, we got a hit on the head or a punch in the stomach. And we numbered ourselves off as 50 people, and then we were marched off to work on filling bomb craters in the Batavia airfield. On the way back, and I stress this because it'll be of interest to you in a moment, the Javanese who had raided the lorries that we British had vacated offered us for sale different items: corned beef, tins of milk, some tins of fruit, cigarettes, and I was able to buy a tin of fruit and quite a number of tins of milk. So that on my 21st birthday, on the 8th of June 1942, I was able to share with 4 or 5 others who were particular little friends of ours, a tin of fruit and condensed milk. I had a lot of other tins of condensed milk, but why I didn't use them each morning over the rice, because all we had in the mornings was a mug of steamed rice and a spoonful of sugar. At midday we had a soup, or at least it was water that vegetables had been boiled in. We had that with a mug of rice, and in the evening when we came back from working, we had a spoonful of the vegetables that had been cooked in the water and another mug of rice. That was our food each day, more or less for the whole of 3.5 years that I was a prisoner. So this was our task each day, filling the bomb holes. In the November of that year, 1942, I developed typhoid fever, and I was reaching the point of death. I felt that I was going without a doubt, and I was arguing with God, saying, look, you said all things work together for good. I believed you're bringing me here for a purpose. What is going to happen? And I heard a voice, as clear as I'm speaking to you, saying, you're not going to die. I have plans for you. And that promise stayed with me the rest of the 2.5 years that I was a prisoner of war. We were taken in about April 43 by train from Batavia down here to Somalia, and there at Somalia we were put on a boat, and we were taken by boat. We were pushed down into the holds where bunks had been constructed. We had 2.5 feet of height and about 1.5 feet wide and 1.5 feet to stretch our legs in. And we were there for 5 days, only allowed onto the dock once a day, just to relieve ourselves of the cramp which we were suffering. When we arrived at Batavia, when we arrived here at these islands called the Spice Islands, which is one of them is called Ambon, and it was on Ambon that we were just loaded off the boats onto the dockside. We assembled, and then we had to march for 2 days. From Ambon here, we marched up to that narrow part there where we spent the night sleeping on the beach in the open. The tide came up during the night, and I had to move my bed. And the next morning we had to march on up round here to a place up here, which is marked, called Liang. And there we were building an airstrip out of a coconut plantation. When we got to the camp, the huts weren't built. The natives were still building them. So we slept on this very rough coral surface for the night. Eventually the huts were completed and we were in the huts. The only problem was the cookhouse was a mile or two down the road where there was some water, and some mornings the lorry broke down and we had to go to work without any breakfast. That was what the huts were like inside. Coming back to this map, this airfield was 2 miles off from the camp, and every day we had to march down to the airfield. It was all right while we had some shoes, but eventually they wore out and we were walking on the coral barefooted. And that was the thing that resulted in a number of chaps giving up hope and going into hospital. And once they went into hospital, the only way they came out was when they were carried to the hill on the opposite side of the camp. So we go on. The coconut plantation, we had to chop the trees down, dig out the roots, and then the task, which I primarily got, was not using these chunkles, these like hoes, to chip away at the coral, but when those who were working and chipping out the coral, they then loaded it into baskets, and 2 of us carried the baskets of coral chips and filled the holes which had been left by digging out the roots of the coconut trees. And if you didn't get enough coral in your basket, you got a punch or a kick on the ankles or a hit over the head by a Japanese guard. We had a half-hour's break in the mornings, and I did manage to climb some coconut trees occasionally to get coconuts. There were handholds so far up, within about 6 feet of the top. And then what happened, my colleague of mine, Eddie Harris, who I made friends with on the boat from England, he would follow me up and I would stand on his shoulders. He'd bunk me up the last 6 feet so that I could reach the thongs of the coconut tree and get the coconuts. That's a picture of the airfield after we had levelled it, and roughly somewhere about third time lucky. Oh, that doesn't want to point. Well, anyway, I don't know why that stopped working as a point. This was really how we began to look towards the end of nearly 12 months on the island of Ammon. In the December of 43, I was put onto a sick draft, and I was delighted I was going to go back to Java away from this toiling on the airfield. I didn't want to go in the hospital. I will explain to you why. So I got my kit packed, my kit bag, with what I'd got in the way of my Bible and some other bits and pieces, and went the next morning and reported to be taken to the boat that was taking me to Java back to more civilised situation. Unfortunately, when I got there, they said, you can't go today because we've had to put someone else in your place. So you can imagine how disappointed I was. And again, I thought that God had let me down. But I hung on to that promise that he had said that I would not die, but that he had plans for me. And in the December that year, I'll go on a bit quicker. In the February of that year, I got onto a boat and was taken back to Java, where I learned that the boat that I was going to go on before had been torpedoed. The sick were down in the holds of the boat, battened in. They couldn't escape, and the whole 369 and lost their lives. We have a wonderful God. He protected me from that danger by taking me off that draft and putting me onto a later one. So I got back to Sumatra here and was taken into what was more or less a hospital, although 5 weeks later, because I was a bit stronger, I was marched round with all the others like horses in a ring, and myself and one other were picked out, and we were put onto a boat which was sailed from Sumatra, sailed from Surabaya. No idea where I was going. But on the way, the medical officer said, you and the other chap who'd been selected are not going any further than Singapore. You're not well enough to go beyond then. I'll get you in the hospital at Singapore. And so I was taken off the boat at Singapore, which I gather was going on to the building of the railway at Sumatra, and I went into the hospital at the Changi prison. The hospital were up the top here. These are the actual prison blocks. And I was in the hospital, I suppose, about 5 weeks. And whilst I was in there, a swarm of bees came onto the side of one of the huts. And I said to the medical officer, if only I had a wooden box, I could get those and we could keep them for some honey. Well, I managed to get the wooden box, and I got the bees into a box and kept them in the officers' quarters outside the jail. I also found there was a Dutch tea planter who also had some bees in a box down the other side of the jail, and we pooled our resources, we worked together, and we sent about £1/4 pound of honey once a fortnight into the hospital at Changi to treat tropical ulcers. So that was beekeeping in Changi jail. We also had a fairly free time in Changi because the Japanese commander had accepted the offer of the British commander to take charge of the British and the prisoners, and so we were under discipline, under British discipline and not Japanese, which, as you gather, is one where you knock the next one about below you. There were classes used to take place in the jail. The commanding officer had said to the Japanese officer, the prisoners would be contented if they had some books. And so the Japanese said, well, if you could get them, by all means. And so the commander got the whole of the Changi library brought into the prison. And fortunately, I was able to get a group of chaps around me who were pleased to listen to lectures on beekeeping in the evenings. And in fact, two Australians who were part of that group one of them wrote to me afterwards and said he and his chum had gone back to Australia and were taking up beekeeping as their profession. So the cells were always open. In about the following April 45, I was moved from Changi down here and was taken up over here to a place called Kranji. And because I had to leave the bees behind, in Kranji we were digging tunnels into the granite hillsides. That meant we had to go in and drill a hole, put in a charge, set fire to it, come out. When it exploded and blew out the dust and the granite, the Japanese sent us in before the dust cleared to pick up the rubble and bring it out. the idea we were digging these tunnels into the hillside. They would join by a 2-metre channel at the back, which they would use as store buildings. This is all the tunnels we had to dig. That was a group we went back later after the war. And this was the signing of the peace treaty in Japan. And so I left my prisoner of war days by returning on a Dutch boat to Liverpool, and I landed there on the 15th September 1945, and the war, of course, ended in August. There is the lecture programme which I give, and the welcome we give to people who want to keep bees. This is a group listening to me lecturing at our apiary, where we got 6 or 7 beehives and different types. And in 1992, we had a mite come from the Far East into Spain, which rendered havoc among the bees in France, Italy, Spain, and got through into Germany, eventually into Britain. And that's one of the problems we've got attacking and killing our bees. We've got another one, which is the Asian hornet, which has only just got to Britain, although in 2004 it arrived in some China at Barcelona, and spread through France very rapidly. We've been anxious in Britain, and at last it was discovered in Gloucestershire. They were dealt with there, but it was also then discovered in the Mendip Hills in Somerset. So that's what it looks like, the Varroa mite, and that's the areas where it's prevalent. Now, I think I've probably used my 20 minutes, haven't I? Yes? I mean, I could go on with this disease and so forth, but perhaps I'll stop there.
Okay. One of the things that we would like to know is, after the war, what connection did you have with Japan? And how have you as a Christian been able to come to terms with some of the very cruel things that were done to you during the war?
Well, there was a Japanese lady who married an English businessman named Holmes. Her name was Kato. And during the early period after the war, her husband was killed in an air crash. And she didn't know what she should do, and she prayed about it, and it was laid upon her heart to take parties of British prisoners of war to Japan for reconciliation. She went to various organisations of prisoners. We all belong to what we call FIPO, Far East Prisoner of War Associations. She went to them and invited them to join her on a journey to Japan, and she was shouted down and pushed out. But she persevered, and eventually she took a small group to Japan. And they found the difference in the welcome there, and in fact they accepted Christ, a number of them, as a result of meeting Japanese Christians. I went to Japan on one of these trips, and this was my experience. We talked to the church. I told them, I should have mentioned this because it's of interest to you, but I'll tell you in a moment. I talked to the churches there and also to some schools. And I talked to some schools of children, I thought girls and boys about 15, 16, 17 years old. And one of the questions they asked me was, in view of all I suffered, how could I forgive the Japanese? And I was able to say, well, I'm a Christian. Christ had forgiven me so much, and he desired me to forgive even my enemies. And so I could forgive the Japanese. Their culture was so different to ours. The army culture was the top brass could set about the ones below. No court-martials. If you did something wrong, you got knocked about for it. And obviously they took it out on the ones below. And the ones below that took it out on us. So that was their culture. I regard the Germans as far worse than the Japanese. They were the same civilization as us, but look how they treated the Jews. So I was able to forgive the Japanese because of what Christ had done for me. Just to digress a second, I told you I had a lot of tins of milk left. When I was taken from the sick bay in Bullock, and I'd heard that voice saying, "You're not going to die, I have plans for you." I was taken into a hospital which was being used as a proper hospital. And the doctors came to me and said, "You know, there's nothing we can do for you. You really need to have milk, and we haven't got any." Oh, I said, "I've got it in my kit bag." And sure enough, he came and he said, "You've got plenty of milk, can we share it with another patient who needs it?" And I said, "By all means." And that milk saved my life. Why I didn't use it on the rice, I don't know. But God was keeping it for that particular occasion. Right. Any more questions?
Oh, yeah, I'm sure there's lots. Don't go anywhere. Other questions? Anybody got other questions? They're all very shy.
It could be about bees as well as my prison days.
I can say, William, from a personal point of view, we first met you 15 years ago when we went to Dartford after a very difficult time in my dad's previous church where, as you're aware, we were treated quite badly. And I stopped going to church and I really felt I don't want to do this anymore. And it was through yourself, William. Actually, I'm so grateful that I rekindled my faith in God, because it's your faith and your experience that's rebuilt my faith. And I'm just so grateful for your love and support, William. And of course for your Gladys, who passed away a few years ago. It's been a tremendous journey we've had together the last 15 years. And every time I want to give up, I always think of you, William, and your courage and your faith.
Uh-huh.
I knew a man a few years ago who'd been a prisoner of war, and he was a prisoner of war in Germany.
Yes.
But he had so much anger and bitterness that he could not speak a civil word about Germans or Japanese. And how would you advise or counsel somebody who had got such anger or hatred or bitterness in their hearts because of what had happened to them in the past?
It'd be very difficult to someone who hadn't got faith. I think the first essential to overcome any problems of difficulty really is to find new birth in Christ Jesus. you then start on a new life which enables, by the power of the Holy Spirit, to find a different way forward and forgive. I've got several Japanese friends. I've been asked by one only this week on an email to give them my life history for their magazine newsletter. But I'm quite happy to do so because, as I said, because I have been given so much by Christ, I can willingly give my service and ability to others. And I've done that through the church since I came back as a prisoner of war. I've been a deacon for 62 years, of which I've been 50 years as traffic steward and 16 years as, 66 years I've been a deacon, 16 years as church secretary. I was also the convener for Christian Endeavour in North West Kent, eventually became the chairman of the London Federation, taken boys and girls on holidays and seen Christ working in their lives. So I've much to thank God for, and that would be the advice I would give to anyone. First of all, make it a matter of prayer. I remember when I was first on the airfield in Batavia, filling in those bomb craters, two chaps, I didn't really know them, but they came up to me and said, "You're a Christian, will you pray for us?" And I said, "Well, I'll pray for you, but why don't you pray for yourselves? You only need to ask the Lord Jesus to become your Saviour, and you can talk to him as you're talking to me."
How many times have you been to Japan since the war?
I've been to Japan twice. I've been to Java and Ambon on 3 occasions, and then the last time I went to Singapore, I've been to Singapore twice, but the last time I went to Singapore and Thailand. The first time I went to Singapore, they pulled the jail. Oh, I've been to Singapore 3 times. The first time I'd like to have got to the jail, but the one in charge wouldn't see us go in there, and so I didn't see the buildings. When I got there I think it was 2002, it had been pulled down. But the curator of the museum there gave me a little box engraved with a piece of the stone that was the walls of the jail. So I've got that at home.
Right. I think one of the things that for some reason, we thought you'd gone to Japan this year, William, but when I asked you in the car when I came over, I thought you'd just come back from Japan, and you said, "Oh no, I've only come back from," and I thought you were going to say somewhere in England, Wales, because I know you've been there recently, and you said Malawi, and I was thinking, for someone of your age, some people in this room, only Malawi, which I didn't even know where it was, and you've given me a geography lesson today, but it's Africa, and it's still, and I think the amazing thing is you keep going, you don't stop and just think, I'm just going to stop. You keep going and do more and more things. And you said over dinner, William's stepping down as church secretary in his church, as deacon, as sort of a leader. And I was worried because I knew there'd be a point where you'd step down. And I thought, it'd be nothing to do. I thought, what's he going to replace it? And he was like, but I've still got loads of things I'm going to do. And I thought, because that's how you change him, is keep going and doing more and more things.
One of the pleasures or joys of sharing in the services in Japan with a number of young people that attends the churches there. The Christian faith is growing definitely in Japan, and that's a great encouragement. Incidentally, it's just of interest to you, 1943, when I was taken off the boat that sank or was torpedoed, my next oldest sister was dying in England here, in hospital because she had heart trouble from rheumatic fever. And she said to my mother, "Don't worry, William is coming home."
You're clearly quite blessed person, and have been able to take inspiration from others and the world. And it just struck me there's two themes here: milk and honey. So, just like to say thank you very much.
Yeah.
What you give and how you take as well.
Thank you. Tony, did you have a question?
I've been reading recently about Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and I was surprised to read that even in the days when Nagasaki was bombed, there was a Catholic chapel there. So there was some Christian influence in Japan during the war, although it's never been prominently exposed in any way.
Sorry.
He was saying that there was a small Christian community in Japan even during the Second World War,
Yeah.
but obviously that's grown
Yes.
since.
Yes. Yes, the last time I went to Japan, I went to Nagasaki, to the Peace Memorial there, and also to the church there, which actually, of course, that one was the Anglican church that I went to there, but I'd also spoke to other gospel church services. It's definitely growing.
What about the whole work of reconciliation? Because I think this is something that matters to you, isn't it? In terms of in the world, there's lots of conflict and things. What's your involvement in reconciliation being, and what do you think about the need for reconciliation in the world?
Well, my involvement, of course, was going back to Japan and sharing my experiences with the people there, and them realising how I was able to forgive them. They, in turn, showed a spirit of love and hospitality to the groups that we went over with, and that changed their attitudes. And I think it's only going to be by interaction between individuals and human beings and not authorities and governments which will eventually bring about. Although we do know that these things are not going to cease completely until Christ returns. And so, although we should be working for reconciliation in order to spread the news of the gospel, I don't think we can expect the whole world to be at peace until Christ himself returns.
Yes.
We're humbled by hearing your story about how you being yourself a prisoner of war, and as being ex-convict myself, I heard and read a story about those soldiers who were captured, and we know the infamous fall of Singapore 1942, where thousands of allied troops were captured, including Indian army. That includes Indians and the Gurkhas. Can I say, have you met any Gurkha prisoners of war while in Changi jail?
Did you meet any Gurkha prisoners of war while you were in Changi? Have you met any Gurkhas?
Any
Gurkha prisoners of war.
Any, sorry,
Gurkhas,
no,
no.
Dutch and American, but that was all, yes.
I'm curious, William, these days, are you still involved with an organisation called Agape? Are you still involved with an organisation called Agape? Because you were very involved with
Yeah. The reconciliation group is known as Agape Reconciliation. That's Kiko, an organisation that she commenced it's still very active. Yes.
Anybody else
Because
got a
the people
question?
know agape means peace.
Yes. Anybody else got a question?
It's difficult to run and put this, but how did you manage to get the strength and courage to survive with that?
How?
You'll forgive me having to have an interpretation, but this area doesn't work very well in groups, and even when I'm lecturing at home, you know, in Dartford, I still need people to interpret. Thank you.
Janet was asking that when you were a prisoner of war, where did the strength come from to endure and to cope with all the things that were happening to you? Where did that inner strength come from?
Well, the strength really came from my strong faith in God. That promise that I cottoned onto, that I wasn't going to die because God had plans for me, held me fast. Even when my eyesight was failing, actually the nerves were killed by malnutrition. I still got a blind spot in the centre of the left eye. Although when I got to Singapore, they put me on to grass soup, which gave me some nutrition. But even when I was losing my eyesight, and my colleague Eddie Harris, who helped me climb coconut trees in the early days of being on Ambon, used to more or less hold my arm to help me walk over the rough coral barefooted. I still trusted that I was going to go through to the end and that I wasn't going to go in the hospital, because I knew once they went into hospital, although we had to share our food with them, because the Japanese didn't allow any food for those in hospital. They only allowed food for those who were working. So those who were working, the cookhouse had to share the rations with those in hospital. And once they went into hospital, they gave up, and very quickly they left this site. It's important, whatever one's circumstances are, to have a faith to hold on to, because it's that which enables you to go forward in spite of all the difficulties that might be encountered.
I drew strength a couple of years ago, William, at the funeral of Amelia, you know, your great-great-granddaughter who passed away a couple of years ago, you know, Amelia. I drew strength from the words you said in her tributes, and just watching how your faith has got you through that. Many people, you know, with 21-year-old passing away would give up, but you've always drawn strength.
That's right.
And that's kept me going personally.
Yes.
And I've got a lot to be grateful.
I had my Bible with me, I carried it all out, got it at home now, but I couldn't read it because my eyesight had gone. But that didn't stop me praying.
Yeah.
Just one last thing on my mind. I was born at the very end of the war. How you see the culture change in our own country that's happened during these years since, bearing in mind everything used to be at the end of the war.
How have you seen, what's your view on how our society and our culture has changed since 1945? Any thoughts or views on the change in our culture in that time?
Well, yes, I'm personally concerned with the way in which the country has drifted away from the faith in God. I'm very concerned that the Parliament is overlooking God's way of life in their various decisions that they make. Our MP is equally as concerned. He is a Christian.
Yeah, the one thing that got on my mind last night when I saw when they did a replay of the Damilola case and the yacht culture.
Well, we're going to pray in a moment, but is there anything else that anybody would like to ask? Any question that you've got on your mind that you...
Just replied to that. When you read of God's anger with the Israelites and the Judaïs in the Old Testament, I can't understand how we as a country escape at the moment.
No, same here.